you very much indeed. Thank you, David, for that extremely kind introduction. A very, very good morning to all of you. It is an enormous pleasure to be here in sunny Cardiff this morning in this absolutely stunning building on what I'm able to tell you could become a very, very significant date in Scotland's calendar. Because if Scotland votes yes in just 6 months' time on the 18th of September this year, we plan that Scotland will become an independent nation exactly 2 years from today, the 24th of March 2016. So I don't know about you, but it excites me greatly to think that in a couple of years from now, we could be celebrating today as Scotland's Independence Day. Of course, I should also say that it is far more of a pleasure to be here today than it would have been to be here in Cardiff just a couple of weeks ago for the rugby. That was, to put it mildly, a rather painful scoreline for Scotland. I have to say, though, I take some considerable comfort in Celtic solidarity on these occasions, and I'm sure we were all delighted for Ireland in their championship and the fitting end to the international career of Brian O'Driscoll, who is truly a giant of the game. We live in very interesting constitutional times, both in Wales and in Scotland. Last week, of course, saw the publication of a Wales bill to provide some tax and borrowing powers for the Welsh Assembly and Government, and to provide for a referendum on income tax powers. And in Scotland, in 6 months' time, we will have our own referendum to decide whether we should become an independent country. I'm here today, obviously, to talk about the progress of the debate on Scottish independence, and I'm pleased to say that the polls are narrowing and have been narrowing for a few months now. And I'm here also to talk about the reasons why I believe that Scotland can, should, and indeed must be an independent country. There is no doubt that Scotland can be independent. We are, after all, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But I'll set out not just that we can be, but why Scotland should be independent and why we must be independent. And in making that case today, I'll focus on 4 key points. Firstly, I'll outline the economic strengths we will have as an independent country, the strong basis on which we'll be able to build a fairer and more prosperous nation. Secondly, I'll suggest that the very foundation on which the No campaign is built in Scotland is actually being demolished by the leaders of that campaign. The notion that the Union is a partnership of equals is being fatally undermined by the clear sense of ownership of and entitlement to UK institutions, assets, even our currency, being asserted by the Westminster elite on an almost daily basis. People in Scotland, and I would suggest that Wales might want to note this too, are being left in no doubt about where Westminster thinks the UK balance of power really lies. Thirdly, I'll set out the 2 futures on offer to people in Scotland on the 18th of September. And fourthly, I recognise that while the decision on Scotland's future is obviously a decision for people in Scotland to make, it will affect the other parts of our islands. I'll therefore explain why I believe that Scottish independence will not only benefit Scotland, but also that it can benefit the other nations of the British Isles and the relationship between us. The social union that exists between us is strong, and I believe very strongly that independence for Scotland can make it even stronger. Before I do any of this, however, it's worth noting that events here in Wales are important to us in Scotland in 2 distinct ways. Firstly, within the current constitutional arrangements, the devolved governments have many, many interests in common. We are tied to Westminster by our underpinning devolution legislation, the effect of some current UK legislation on our respective countries, and of course by our funding arrangements. We may not Indeed, we do not see eye to eye on all issues, and I'll say more about the Barnett formula and the basis of funding for devolved government in both Scotland and Wales a bit later on. There are also important differences between the devolution settlements in Scotland and in Wales, which means that our bilateral relations with the UK government vary and are normally central to day-to-day intergovernmental business. But there's no doubt at all that we in Cardiff, Belfast and Edinburgh work together regularly and constructively on issues of interest to all of us. I remember very well, and I remember very fondly, the constructive relationship I had when I was Scottish Health Secretary with your own former Health Minister, Edwina Hart. Within the UK, there is the formal intergovernmental machinery of the joint ministerial committees made up of the UK government and the devolved governments. As it happens, I'll be attending a joint ministerial committee meeting with your First Minister in London on Wednesday of this week. And of course, more widely across these islands, there is the British-Irish Council, which also includes the Republic of Ireland and the Crown dependencies. And for the avoidance of any doubt, an independent Scotland will still be part of the British Isles. We will still be a member of the British-Irish Council, which is of course headquartered in Edinburgh. And as an independent member, we could, when circumstances demand it, I think, be an even more powerful ally of Wales than we are able to be right now. Within these bodies, we discuss matters of common interest, we work together on solutions to common problems and develop relationships between our administrations. So developments here in Wales on specific issues which are common across the UK are of real interest to us in Scotland. The views of the Welsh Government are important to us when we work in partnership in common cause. The second area of real interest to us is, of course, the development of the devolution settlement here and indeed in Northern Ireland, and what this illustrates and says about the nature of the United Kingdom today. And I think it's fair to say that devolution here in Wales has evolved perhaps more rapidly than it has in any other part of the United Kingdom. From the original Wales Act of 1998, you've moved to an assembly with full lawmaking powers, with a Welsh government, and now there's a bill to devolve to Wales tax raising and borrowing powers. The second part of the Silk Commission's work, and I'm pleased to have met the man behind the Silk Commission this morning, but the second part of the Commission's work has proposed further devolution of functions such as policing, as well as a move to the reserve powers model that we have in Scotland. And I think there are two particularly interesting things about these developments from a Scottish perspective. One is the use of Scotland often as a point of reference for the development of the devolution settlement in Wales, whether in legislative powers or financing arrangements. I know that colleagues from the Scottish Government met with the Silk Commission during its work. It's also true to say that the work of the Hotham Commission has influenced the development of income tax devolution in Scotland, especially on the issue of adjusting the block grant. Obviously, I hesitate to push this point too far because I'm confident that Scotland will vote yes to independence in September, and whether that acts as a point of comparison for Wales in the future is really not for me to say. But perhaps the most interesting thing about these developments is how many of them have been driven by the Welsh Assembly itself. First, the separation of the Executive and Assembly with the formation of the Welsh Assembly Government in 2002 by a motion of the Assembly. Then the Richard Commission appointed by the Welsh Government, which led to the Government of Wales Act 2006, and then the referendum of 2011, giving the Assembly its primary lawmaking powers. Then the Hotham Commission, again appointed by the Welsh Government, which led to proposals on tax powers and financing for devolved government in Wales, and which of course was the driver of the Silk Commission and now the Wales Bill. All of these crucial driving initiatives in Welsh devolution, in your devolution journey, have been homegrown, and I think that is incredibly important. When I cast my mind back to May 2011, after the elections in both of our countries earlier that month, the three devolved governments issued a statement which said this: the Scottish Parliament, the National Assembly of Wales and the Northern Ireland Assembly were established and their responsibilities have been developed and extended according to the views of the people of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on their own institutions of government. The development of devolution in Wales, in my view, could not be a better demonstration of the truth of that statement. It's the governments and the assemblies of Wales, and indeed the people of Wales, that have driven the development of your institutions and the way you are governed. Now, in September, the people of Scotland will be asked whether we want to take a further step in our constitutional journey and become an independent country. As part of this journey, the Scottish Government has produced what has been described, accurately described in my view, as the most detailed blueprint for any country moving towards independence. And we continue now in the run-up to the referendum to make sensible and serious preparations for the transition to independence if a majority of the Scottish people vote yes. Before the summer recess of our Parliament, we will publish for consultation the draft Scottish Independence Bill that would be introduced to the Scottish Parliament following a yes vote. That bill will set out an interim constitution for an independent Scotland, one that will be founded on the principle of the sovereignty of the people, a principle that has always been at the heart of our constitutional ethos. It will also outline the participative and collaborative process by which Scotland, as an independent country, will prepare its permanent written constitution. The UK is one of few countries in the world that doesn't have a written constitution, and one of the real benefits of Scotland becoming independent will be able to set out in a written constitution the rights and responsibilities we all have as citizens. I think that process will be an exciting opportunity for a newly independent nation. But first, of course, we need to persuade a majority of the Scottish people to vote yes. In our white paper that I referenced a second ago, we set out the case for independence, and we argued that with the powers of independence, Scotland can be more democratic, fairer and more prosperous. Scotland is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. If we were independent today, we would be the 14th richest country in terms of our GDP per head in the entire OECD. The UK would be 18th. Every year, the Scottish Government produces an analysis of our public finances under the very important national statistics kite mark. These show that last year Scotland generated £800 per head more in tax revenues than the UK as a whole. If we take tax and spending together, then over the past 5 years, our public finances have been healthier than the UK's by some £8.3 billion. That's around £1,600 for every person in Scotland. An analysis by the Financial Times, which I can exclusively reveal is not the in-house journal of the Yes campaign, but a recent analysis in the FT confirmed that Scotland is richer than the rest of the UK and in the top 20 countries globally in terms of our GDP per head. Even the international ratings agency Standard & Poor's said that even excluding North Sea output, Scotland would qualify for their highest economic assessment. We've got world-class universities, a thriving life sciences industry, brilliance in creative industries. We have a quarter of Europe's offshore wind and tidal potential. Our manufacturing firms export around £15 billion every year, and our food and drink industry is truly world-class. So the great issue for Scotland is not whether we are wealthy enough to be independent. The great issue is why so many of our people don't feel the benefit of our great wealth as a country. The opponents of independence say that the Scottish economy is too reliant on oil. That's simply not true. Without oil, Scotland's economy per head is almost the same size as the UK's. With oil, it is substantially bigger, around 20% bigger. Oil is not a burden, as the opponents of independence want us to believe. Oil is a huge bonus for Scotland. Over decades, there has been an attempt to convince people in Scotland that this natural resource bonus and the generation of several £100 billion of revenue has been something of a curse on our country. The idea seems to be that we in Scotland can't be trusted to manage this windfall, that we need to leave it to Westminster. But leaving it to Westminster has resulted in the squandering of decades of oil revenues. You know, alongside Iraq, the UK is the only major oil-producing nation in the world not to have invested in an oil fund for future generations. If we look at Norway, a country very similar in very many ways to Scotland, we see a country where oil is an even bigger part of the economy. But with the powers of independence, Norway has created an oil fund that today is worth more than £500 billion. They call it their national pension fund. So Norway's oil wealth will keep on benefiting the Norwegian people long after the oil itself has run out. And I would put it to you that no Westminster politician would dream of going to Norway to tell them that they are incapable of managing their great oil wealth. But they do think it's in order to give that message to people in Scotland. By value, there is as much oil left in the North Sea as has already been taken out. So there is still time to steward and save our vast natural energy wealth for future generations. But we'll only be able to do that if we have the powers to do so. And this then gets to the heart of the case for independence. No one seriously doubts that Scotland can be a successful independent country. The question is, should we be an independent country? The UK government, in my view, deserves considerable praise. Those are words you won't often hear me say in one sentence, but I'll say it again. The UK government deserves praise for the approach it took to the Edinburgh Agreement, the agreement that paved the way for the independence referendum. That agreement put beyond any doubt that Scotland's referendum will be fair, legal and decisive. We see, sadly, from other parts of the world that that's not always the case. And I'm very confident that the respect that the Edinburgh Agreement demonstrates for the democratic process and for the sovereignty of the Scottish people will be the guiding principle in the negotiations that follow a yes vote. But notwithstanding that, there is no doubt that the conduct of the No campaign in Scotland, which of course includes the UK government, is laying bare the truth of where the Westminster elite thinks power really lies in the UK. Those opposed to independence always used to claim that the UK, as it currently stands, is an equal partnership of nations and of people. But now, in its attempts to scare and at times threaten voters in Scotland, the No campaign is destroying the very idea that the UK is an equal partnership. That notion is being torn apart in Scotland on an almost daily basis. The leaders of the No campaign are literally going out of their way to demonstrate where they think power really lies. And as far as the UK government is concerned, power rests with just one party in the relationship, and that is with Westminster. And we are discovering in Scotland that as far as Westminster is concerned, we have fewer rights than most of us thought we did. In the event of independence, we are told that we have the obligation to pay a share of the debt run up by successive Westminster Chancellors, and I should say we agree with that. But we're also told that we have no right, we will have no right to a share of the assets that we have helped to construct, build and pay for. The institutions of the UK have been made and paid for by people in Scotland and people in Wales, just as much as they have by people anywhere else in the UK. We've paid our taxes, we've made our national insurance contributions, we've paid our TV licence fees. People from Scotland have worked in and contributed to the development of all of the UK's institutions. The Bank of England was even founded by a Scot, as was the BBC, incidentally. But as far as the Westminster government and its allies are concerned, we have no stake in the very institutions we have helped to fund and build up. They say we've no right to share the pound, which is Scotland's currency, or the Bank of England. They say we've no right to share in any of the UK's current institutions. So it goes like this. As long as we stay with Westminster, the UK government is saying that they will allow us to benefit from the institutions we've paid for. But if we vote yes, they will decide what we are and what we are not entitled to. And I think that attitude demonstrates precisely why Scotland needs to be independent. Because if the reality of the relationship between Scotland and Westminster is, as the No campaign seems to say it is, one in which we have no stake in any of the assets we've helped to create, then why on earth would anyone vote to continue that? The UK government, believe it or not, even paid for and promoted a legal opinion which says that Scotland as a country has been extinguished. So the notion of an equal partnership is being shown by the conduct of the No campaign to be a sham. Scotland formally extinguished within the Westminster system, no rights to the institutions and assets we have contributed to, and a reminder that Westminster is the decision maker, with Scotland relegated to second-class status. Why would anyone want to stay in a union where we are treated like that? Independence, by contrast, offers the greatest opportunity we will ever have to build a better Scotland and a better relationship, a genuine relationship of equals across these islands. An independent Scotland will face challenges just as every country does. But just as is the case here in Wales, there have been real gains, real benefits for individuals, families and communities from having the ability to take some decisions through devolution. In our case, devolution has enabled us to resist the privatisation of the health service, protect the NHS budget, cut waiting times. It has allowed us to protect the principle of free education. We introduced a smoking ban before other parts of the UK. We've provided free personal care to our elderly and restored, as you have, free prescriptions for the sick. An independent Scotland will give us the power to extend these gains of devolution to all areas of government. And crucially, we will be equipped in a way that we are currently not to meet the big challenges of the future. We'll be able to build a social security system fit for the future and put a stop to the indiscriminate welfare cuts that are threatening to push 100,000 more Scottish children into poverty by 2020. We'll be able to create more jobs and opportunities by designing an economic policy that puts Scotland first. The UK has one of the most regionally unbalanced economies in the world. In Wales, you know that better than most. In 2011, output per head in London was over 70% higher than the UK average. By contrast, output per head in Wales and the northeast of England was nearly 25% below the UK average. And since then, it appears this economic inequality has got worse. A recent report that I was reading said that 80% of private sector jobs in the UK are now being created in London. Now, because of our inherent strengths, the Scottish economy has actually proved quite resilient to these trends. But the big question is how we ensure we continue to be resilient in the future. What is best for our future as an economy? One option is to remain as an economic region of an unbalanced and unequal economy where ever more jobs and opportunities are concentrated in London. The other is to take on the powers of a national economy. Powers that will give us the ability to give firms in Scotland a competitive tax edge with control over both spending and revenue. Both sides of our national balance sheet will be able to transform childcare and make it easier for parents, women in particular, to get back into the labour market. We can design an immigration policy appropriate to our needs, rejecting the approach of Westminster, which is discouraging talented individuals from coming to Scotland. Independence will give us the full range of powers we need to reindustrialise Scotland, to boost exports and ensure our world-class levels of higher education, research and development are translated into world-leading business innovation. For the rest of the UK, this strengthening of the Scottish economy, I think, could be a major shot in the arm, because it will help to rebalance the economy, and it will surely provoke a rethink about the London-centric nature of UK economic policy making. With a no vote, there appears little chance of that happening. The Labour Party in Scotland last week revealed its plans for more powers for Scotland in the event that independence is rejected. For those of you who haven't followed this closely, I can tell you that these plans represented something of a retreat from their initial proposals outlined last year. Last year, they advocated full devolution of income tax. Now they propose that planned tax-varying powers for Scotland should be extended only very slightly to allow for Scotland to control 15 pence in the pound of income tax rather than the 10 pence that is currently legislated for. Business taxes are to remain with Westminster. For Labour, the ability to give business in Scotland a competitive advantage is something that's to be strictly forbidden. We won't be allowed the competitive powers we need to grow the economy, boost tax and fund public spending. But in the event of a no vote, they will happily see Scotland forced into another type of competition, because to protect public spending, we'll be forced into a competition for favours with Westminster. It's Westminster that will continue to decide our budget. Now, here in Wales, you are arguing strongly for an increase in your funding and a different approach to calculating the block grant. Let me say, you have every right to do so. And I believe that independence for Scotland, which will mean that we are no longer dependent on grants of our own money from Westminster, but responsible instead for raising our own resources, would present the best opportunity for Wales to argue for and win a new funding deal. And that would be so much better, surely, than having Scotland and Wales set against each other in lobbying Westminster for fairer allocations of our own money. Your job in Wales is to argue for your best interests, and I deeply respect that. But reform of the Barnett formula after a no vote does hold real dangers for Scotland, and that's why a yes vote is so important. From your Hotham Commission proposals, we know that reform of the Barnett formula could mean a cut of up to £4 billion in Scotland's budget. Now, no doubt Scottish governments in the future would lobby against that happening, but it would be out of our hands. Decisions on Scotland's future funding would be firmly in the hands of Westminster. And I don't want Scotland as a country to have to lobby Westminster for a fair allocation of our own resources. And I don't want us to be in competition with Wales in doing so. That's the opposite of strengthening devolution. It's the opposite of the financial responsibility that I want us to have, but it's what will happen if Scotland votes no. An independent Scotland is the far better option for all of us, which brings me to the last of the points I want to make. I started out today reflecting on Scotland's rather unhappy visit to the Millennium Stadium a couple of weeks ago. That great rugby tournament is called the Six Nations for a reason. Within these islands, there are different nations, different countries, and our peoples have chosen different models for our government. The evolution of devolved government in Wales shows clearly the advantages of home rule and the advantages of a people deciding how to be governed. The story of devolution in Scotland shows the same. Now the Scottish Government is demonstrating the advantages of Scotland as one of the nations of these islands taking the next step and becoming independent. The advantages not just for Scotland, but the advantages for the rest of the UK as well. With Scotland as an independent nation, the third independent member of the British Irish Council, the balance of power within the British Isles shifts away from Westminster, and I believe very strongly that that will be in the interests of all of the nations of these diverse islands of ours. And make absolutely no mistake, in the event of a yes vote in September, people in Scotland will continue to be the closest of friends, neighbours, family, allies with people here in Wales, in England and in Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister has asked people in a display of what was described as love bombing, he's asked people in other parts of the UK to rally support for the No campaign by saying to people in Scotland, in the words of David Bowie, "Please don't go." That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The social, the family, historic, cultural, sporting ties that bind us together will be as strong as ever. Scotland is not being removed. We're not going anywhere. We'll simply be taking responsibility for our own future. The only thing that will be removed from Scotland will be the writ of Westminster. Sadly, in the campaign so far, we've seen how the Westminster establishment reacts when Scotland threatens, as they see it, their interests. But I am confident, very confident, that the people of Scotland will focus on the positive arguments being made by supporters of independence. They will reject the bluster of those with most to lose and the naked exercise of power in defence of those interests. And when we vote yes, I believe with every fibre of my being that Scotland will have chosen the better future for us, for the people of Scotland, but also for our friends and neighbours across these islands and beyond. Thank you very much indeed.